Now, of the 7 scenes in Act 4, 5 of them, 4-1, 4-2, 4-3, 4-4, and 4-6, are the 5 shortest scenes in the whole play. The sixth shortest being way back in 1.4, Act 1, Scene 4. Now, of the 5 short scenes, of the 5 very short scenes of Act 4, Act 4, Scene 3 is by far my favorite, though it clocks in at 65 lines on the nose. There is much to recommend it, both in terms of foreshadowing of stuff that's going to become important later, and great and quotable lines, and perhaps most significantly at all from the standpoint of analysis, thesis paper writing, that sort of thing, a notable alteration in Hamlet's well, not personality so much, but imagery, tone. I mean, Hamlet is a guy whose personality manifests verbally. How he's talking reflects how he's thinking, and how he's thinking reflects who he is. And coming back to that initial point that the play has been joking about for the entire time, about interiority, and the extent to which the illusion of a fictional character actually possessing it can be successfully created. Hamlet has talked in a very, suspension of disbelief wrecking, or perhaps enhancing, depending on your point of view, way about how only what's inside him, only the stuff that's on the inside being what matters. Now, of course, a fictional character, as we've been, the play's been making us aware since Act 1, Scene 2, a fictional character doesn't have any of that. There is no real Prince Hamlet of Denmark. He is a series of words on a series of pieces of paper, and beyond that, or from another perspective, he is a role for an actor. But he appears more than any other fake person ever created to have an inner life, to have, as others before me have observed, to have so much more that he doesn't say, even though he says so much. He says, in fact, more than anybody in Shakespeare. It seems to only scratch the surface. There seems to be so much more on Hamlet's mind that he never gets around to telling us, doesn't have time to tell us, or very possibly simply doesn't feel like telling us. Perhaps it's none of our business. But the things he does say in this scene are worth making mention of. So let's get to it. Now, before Hamlet even gets dragged in by the guards at right after line 15. We see the king ranting to some of his nameless attendants. How dangerous is it that this man goes loose? Yet must not we put the strong law on him? He's loved of the distracted multitude, who like not in their judgment but their eyes, and where 'tis so the offender's scourge is weighed, but never the offense. In other words, he daren't punish Hamlet because Hamlet is so popular with the people. Now, Claudius attributes this to the fact that Hamlet is good-looking, apparently. The distracted multitude who like not in their judgment but their eyes, so they only like Prince Hamlet because he is handsome. Now, whether this is to any extent true, or whether this is just Claudius's bitterness, I mean, we already know from real life that the type of guy Claudius is is rather in the habit of dismissing other people's worth that way. Oh, people only like so and so because he or she is good looking, and oftentimes that's not actually the case. It's just more reflective of the bitterness of the person saying so than it is of reality. But regardless of whether it's because he's good looking or for some other reason, Claudius is concerned about how popular with the people Hamlet is. Where it is so, the offender's scourge is weighed, but never the offense. In other words, if I punish Hamlet, the people will care about what his punishment is. They will protest, be up in arms about, perhaps literally up in arms, about whatever his punishment is, but not care about this terrible thing that he's done, the accidental curtain stabbing of Polonius. So we'll start caring more about the cool stuff Hamlet says when he comes in a couple of lines later, but this is something we want to file away. This point about Hamlet being popular with the people, loved of the distracted multitude, is going to become important later. And hearing it here for the first time, we do notice its pretty much entire absence up until now, despite the fact that this play concerns, who is or isn't king, and what's going on in government. We haven't heard a lot about the people as a whole and how they're taking any of this. There is some reference in 1.2 in Claudius's big speech that starts the scene about nor have we here in Bard your better wisdoms which have freely gone with this affair along for all our thanks, delivered to the assembled crowd in the throne room. Thank you for going along with my suspiciously quick remarriage to my dead brother's wife, but that only represents the upper crust, the people who are hanging out at court, not the people of Denmark in any larger sense. Now, the people of Denmark in a larger sense are going to, for the first time, become important as we progress through Act 4. So remember that they were mentioned. Okay, Hamlet is dragged in by two guards, dragged before Claudius, who asks him, now, Hamlet, where's Polonius? At supper, Hamlet responds around line 17. Elaborating upon this, after Claudius raises an eyebrow, not where he eats, but where he is eaten. A certain convocation of politic worms are e'en at him. So Hamlet technically not lying. Polonius is at supper. It's just that he's the supper for worms and flies and maggots, being dead and all. Hamlet elaborates further. Your worm is your only emperor for diet. We fat all creatures else to fat us, and we fat ourselves for maggots. And your fat king and your lean beggar is but variable service, 2 dishes, but to 1 table, that's the end. So Hamlet here referencing something that would be that would come to be known in a much later work partially based on Hamlet as the Circle of Life. A man may fish with the worm that hath eat of a king, and eat of the fish that hath fed of that worm. So that in that iteration sounds like something sort of noble, cosmic, even in line with some scriptural idea of to dust we returneth. Though adding the part about getting eaten by worms is a little more graphic than the scriptures put it. And where Hamlet goes next with this is more graphic still. Claudius asks, what dost thou mean by this? And Hamlet responds in line 29, nothing but to show you how a king may go a progress through the guts of a beggar. Now, to go a progress was to have a a parade, one of those things where the king or queen would, on their horse or in whatever the conveyance of the time would go through the streets, doing the monarch wave while the people applauded. So after death, having been eaten by a worm, a king can have a little parade through the intestines of the poorest man in the land, having been eaten by a worm that the poor man then uses to fish. So there is an echo of biblical phrases, returning to dust, and certainly anything about poor people and fishing, would have had echoes of various things that Jesus says to Shakespeare's original audience in a way that it might not for most people today. Where is Polonius? The king asks exasperatedly once again. A simple, very simple question that Hamlet is answering poetically rather than literally. In heaven, Hamlet comes up with yet another answer that is, according to the beliefs of the time, not technically false, but not the type of answer Claudius wants. He is trying to get at the literal answer of, where in Elsinore is his corpse. In heaven, send thither to see. If your messenger find him not there, seek him in the other place yourself. A great joke. And here's an even better one. But if indeed you find him not within this month, you shall nose him as you go up the stairs into the lobby. So this secret will not stay secret forever, because eventually Polonius, being dead, will start to stink. You don't need me, in other words, to tell you where his body is. Wait long enough and it will be obvious where his body is. You shall nose him. Now, so there's a great, yet another riff on this idea of making secrets apparent, making secrets not secret anymore. Getting what's on the inside to be on the outside. Most centrally, the secret of the king's guilt, the murder the king has committed, and the play being the thing that will reveal that, as posited by Hamlet in 2.2 and put to the test in 3.2. And now we have an even more literal, an entirely physical process of what's on the inside becoming visible on the outside. Bones and guts, and through the process of putrefaction, of rotting. Now, and all culminating in maybe Hamlet's greatest laugh line of the play, when he mentions, up the stairs into the lobby. The king tells his attendants, go seek him there, go get his body. And on their way out the door, Hamlet informs them, he will stay till you come. Don't worry, he'll wait for you. He won't go anywhere. He'll be there when you get there, because he's dead. So it's such a simple joke, but such a great one. Now, in all of these responses of Hamlet's, we are noticing something. There is a sudden focus on or obsession with, worms and rotting and stinking, and the corpses and the putrefaction, that we haven't heard from Hamlet before. When we first met him back in 1.2, Hamlet had his eyes very much towards the skies, concerned more with the next world than with this world. In his first soliloquy back in 1.2, he rejected it. 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed, things rank and gross in nature possess it nearly. in the immediate aftermath of the accidental question mark curtain stabbing of Polonius, Hamlet seems to have become suddenly obsessed with the things rank and gross in nature that he rejected or saw himself as above or as unconcerned with back in 1.2. Now, in a way, this is the same stuff Hamlet has always been concerned with, but from another point of view. Hamlet has in his from his first appearance in 1.2 to his most famous speech in 3.1, Hamlet has always been concerned with the question of what happens after we die. He makes a decision based on the alleged rules of it in 3.3, a decision that frustrates us. But there's two ways of taking the phrase, what happens after we die. Right? There's what happens after we die in the sense of souls and God and heaven and hell and what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, as Hamlet famously puts it in 3.1. But there's also what happens after we die in the sense of, duh, we go into the ground and worms eat us. It doesn't take... as Horatio, who puts it in 1.5, there needs no ghost come from the grave to tell us this. This is common knowledge. You don't need to be a philosophy major from Wittenberg to know what happens after we die in that sense. Any fool can tell that. So it's a different answer to the same question. Hamlet is still obsessed with this question of what happens after we die, but suddenly from a different point of view, the earthly point of view rather than the spiritual one. Yet another relation to that, spirit and body division, that Aristotelian, 2000 or so, just under years before Shakespeare, and what would get inherited by Freud 300 years later as a sort of masculine-feminine division, the idea of the spirit as male and the body or the flesh as female, as Hamlet puns on it, and to his mom to excoriate her in 3.4, or to Ophelia to embarrass her in 3.2. Hamlet has it's as though the stabbing of Polonius was a sort of reminding me almost of Eliot's line from the end of Prufrock about human voices waking us and we drown. Hamlet has been woken up from seeing his surroundings philosophically, and with the blood of Polonius on his hands. Not that it bothers him. We've already seen how little it appears to bother him. It's just turned his attention elsewhere, to the physical rather than to the spiritual. And remember, this grossness, they're all jokes, right? They're all wisecracks. We've been observing since 1.2 that curious facet of Hamlet's personality, where even though he's the most famous depressed guy in all of literature, he's also pretty funny. Can't stop with the jokes, as though he's kind of gone, full circle, come out the other side of depression, where he sees not necessarily what is funny about such things, but rather that in the sense of dismissing it, in the sense of meaninglessness, that everything is a joke. Now, this is certainly in modern terms, to look at the influence that Hamlet has cast on the popular culture. We hear often, especially from students, of a comparison between Hamlet and Batman, right? The idea of vengeance for the parent or parents, And yeah, in Batman comics, almost since the character's inception in the late 1930s, references to Hamlet, or comparisons between Bruce Wayne and the Prince of Denmark, have been invited and referenced in the comics. Even in the more recent film iterations of Batman, he brings up that who you are on the inside versus what you do, a question that is very important to this play. But I think it goes deeper than that. In scenes like this, the constant wisecracking about rotting and guts and death, as though all of this simply amuses Hamlet. We can see in a scene like this that it makes as much sense to compare Hamlet to the Joker as it does to Batman. This, just as in an earlier scene, I alluded to modern concepts of politics and talked about how Hamlet cannot be contained by our modern categories of being quote unquote liberal or conservative, that Hamlet is both and neither. It speaks to his limitlessness as a character, that even with two arch enemies from later art, e.g. Batman and the Joker, are held to be thesis and antithesis, the opposite of each other in every way, nothing like each other. Hamlet is so psychologically large a character that he is somehow both of them, a combination, Batman and the Joker at the same time. Steely-eyed, humorless revenger, concerned with everyone else's sins and what punishments they deserve, and also the death-obsessed prankster to whom it's all one, and the very idea of anybody quote unquote deserving anything according to some simplistic system of right or wrong, good or evil, is all a big joke. So we're seeing Hamlet set on a trajectory here, metaphor-wise, image-wise. He's got this new game he's playing verbally about death and decay and worms and guts and stinking corpses and rotting. This will culminate, of course, in the great graveyard scene, what many people consider to be verbally Hamlet's finest hour in Act 5, Scene 1, where we'll see it all get united. The Hamlet finding a way in the poetry of that scene to unite the earlier, spiritual concerns with the more rank and gross earthly concerns introduced here into the finest poetry he yet speaks and that anyone has ever spoken. So yes, look out for that in a few more scenes. If you've been wondering this whole time, when isn't Hamlet the guy who talks to the skull? When does that happen? It's near the end. It's coming up. Don't worry. Okay, so Hamlet is getting led off to the boats for England. Good, he responds. So is it if thou knewest our purposes. Claudius responds to that. Hamlet quips, I see a cherub that sees them, in line 46, meaning possibly just that he is guided by God in his opposition to Claudius, as sort of, God is on my side, or whether he actually means his father. I know what you've done because a supernatural being, a divine being, i.e. my dad's ghost, has told me. if Hamlet should be seen as having his father's spirit in mind when he speaks that line, "I see a cherub that sees them," we might pause over Shakespeare's selection of the term cherub as opposed to, spirit or angel or any of the other, supernatural-ish, religious-ish words he might have picked. As you probably already know, cherubs are specifically the little baby angels, the little naked babies with the wings that look like Cupid with the bow and arrow. So using the word that specifically means the child angels about his father is an odd choice of words. It reverses who the adult is and who the child is in a way that for people who are into this connection reminds us of the fact that as Shakespeare was putting the finishing touches on this play, he had recently lost his son, his only son, whose name was Hamnet, with an N, Hamlet Shakespeare, at the age of 11 in 1596. People have long argued about whether Shakespeare's dead son Hamnet with an N has anything to do with the play Hamlet with an L, and if so, what? James Joyce fans know that Joyce made great philosophical and literary and symbolic hay out of it in his Ulysses. Whether indeed Shakespeare had been so his obsession with the tale of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, had been such a lifelong obsession that it influenced his choice of name for his only son way back when the child was born in 1585, when Shakespeare was only 21. Now, does I don't want to go as far as saying that Shakespeare's real life dead son explains everything about the play, but at the same time, it's unimaginable to think that any parent who's lost a child, even back at this time when that happened more commonly, it happened more often than thankfully it does today. I don't think that meant it hurt any less. So though Shakespeare's real life dead son Hamnet might not explain the whole play, but it's unimaginable that it isn't on his mind at all. That if someone who's lost a child is writing a play about death and ghosts and the inability to stop grieving to stop missing the departed, that it wouldn't be on his mind at all, and that it would have nothing to do with what he's expressing here. So, yes, I think what would be the first thing that would, I suppose, especially back then when more things would have been laid to the explanation of God's will, or seen more directly as God's doing, that a parent who's lost a child wouldn't have immediately asked, why wasn't it me? I'm older. Why didn't God take me instead? And so he responds by writing a play where what should have happened does happen, where the father dies and the son remains, rather than the considerably more tragic other way around, as had happened to him. But at the same time, we don't want to forget about the, I think, very persuasive idea that the so-called Hamlet, the first version of Hamlet that does not survive, that bombed on the stage in the late 1580s, may have been by a very young Shakespeare, might have been his first draft of the play that he then spent 10 years revising. If that was the case, that the so-called Hamlet was by Shakespeare, then that would have been written before his son died. So it wouldn't be the case that the entire play comes out of, or that his idea to write about this character comes out of straight out of and solely out of a process of mourning for his 11-year-old son, Hamlet. He might have been, very well might have been, to some degree obsessed with this story even before that happened, for reasons known only to Shakespeare himself. Anyway, Hamlet sees a cherub that sees Claudius's purposes at line 46, humorously bidding him, "Farewell, dear mother." Claudius, confused again, responds, "Thy loving father." Hamlet responds, "My mother." Father and mother is man and wife. Man and wife is one flesh, and so my mother. Using that impeccable religious logic once again to embarrass Claudius by calling him a woman, possibly in a bit of payback for that unmanly grief line that Claudius used towards him back in 1.2. And now that Hamlet knows that Claudius is the real unmanly one here, having committed the, according to the stereotypes of the time, very womanish act of killing with poison, the stereotypically female way of committing murder in the Renaissance. So the guards drag Hamlet off to the boats for England, and the king is left alone. And in the closing lines, we see that he is upping the stakes rather considerably. "England, if my love thou hold'st at aught," he begins at line 55. "Thou mayest not coldly set our sovereign process. You may not ignore my superior position to you, since yet thy cicatrice looks raw and red after the Danish sword, and thy free awe pays homage to us." Another reference to the Danegeld, the neglected tribute, mentioned by Claudius towards the end of 3.1, allowing us to set the play sometime in the mid-11th century, possibly contemporaneously with Shakespeare's other great tragedy, Macbeth. Which imports it full by letters congruing to that effect: "The present death of Hamlet do it England, for like the hectic in my blood he rages." In other words, Claudius is now, whether he only just this second decided to do it or had already decided to do it before this scene started and is only saying it out loud now, he's not just sending Hamlet on an errand to England to get him out of his face, but is sending letters along saying, in effect, "Dear King of England, when you read this, kill that guy Hamlet." Whether you make it look like an accident or whatever, up to you, but I don't want to see him again. So as Hamlet is being led to the ships in the next scene, 4.4, or depending on what edition you're reading, the folio omitted some of the next scene. It was only printed in full in the second quarto of 1605. More on that in the video for 4.4. But as Hamlet is being led to the ships for England in the next scene, as far as we know, he's going to his death. So there is a how's Hamlet going to get out of this one? Paul cast over the remainder of Act 4. More on that in the videos for the aforesaid remainder.